It was the winter of 1895 when the bell at St. Agnes Convent rang for the last time. The villagers of Black Hollow, a remote township nestled in the dense pine-covered hills of Maine, remembered the chime vividly. It was a heavy, sonorous toll that echoed down the valley at exactly 4:03 in the morning in usual, for the bell was only rung during morning prayers at dawn or for funerals. That morning it rang once, and then never again. At the time, the convent was home to 24 sisters, cloistered away from the world, living lives of silence, prayer, and sacrifice. The convent was run by Mother Superior Elspeth, a woman, so stern in her devotion that even the local priest, Father Leckler, rarely looked her in the eye. The sisters followed the rule of Saint Benedict strictly. They were never to leave the grounds, never to receive outside visitors, and never to question the will of God. The convent had stood on that forested rise since 1829, long before Black Hollow was even charted. Some believed it was built on older ground, on top of a burned mission from the French colonial period. Others whispered of older things beneath the chapel's stone things with no name. 3 days passed after the bell rang, and still no one from the convent emerged. On the 4th day, Father Leckler walked up the snowy trail to St. Agnes with a sacristan and a lantern. What they found upon entering the convent grounds would haunt Black Hollow for generations. The gates were unlocked. That alone was chilling. The convent's gates were iron and ancient, creaking on hinges rusted by 100 winters. They were always locked, without exception. And yet, on that grey morning, they swung open like a maw. The snow inside the courtyard, it was untouched. No footprints, no signs of life, only the soft hiss of wind inside the main chapel. Candles had burned down to puddles of wax. The great wooden crucifix above the altar hung crooked, as if wrenched by unseen hands. A hymn book lay splayed on the altar, open to a song no one in the village could identify. It wasn't in Latin, it wasn't in English or French either. The notes were erratic, jagged, and the text scrawled in ink that smelled faintly of iron. They called the sheriff, a man named Theodore Rourke, who had once fought in the war between the states and thought himself immune to fear. By sundown, Rourke wished he'd never crossed that gate. The convent was empty, not ransacked, not abandoned, just empty, as if the sisters had simply vanished mid-step. Plates of half-teen bread and boiled eggs sat on the refectory tables, cold tea in porcelain. Cups, a chair knocked over in the infirmary. In one room, a pair of knitting needles rested on a windowsill beside a shawl still warm to the touch. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, just ... absence. But there were signs, nonetheless. In the eastern wing, where the novices slept, the beds had been stripped bare. All 12, the other rooms, the senior sisters, the infirmed, the kitchen staff, were untouched. But the 12 novices, young women between the ages of 16 and 22, were gone. Their names were listed in the convent's ledger: Agnes, Marianne, Colette, Evangeline, Isabel, Ruth, Claire, Magdalena, Beatrice, Felicity, Jane, and Therese. All 12 had vanished. Mother Elsbeth and the older nuns remained at least. On paper, but their beds were made, their shoes neatly lined along the wall. Rosaries looped delicately around bedposts, as if they too had prepared for some sacred journey. There was one more thing in the crypt beneath the chapelware only. Mother Elsbeth held a key-share of Rourke, found a trail of melted wax, descending the stone steps like tears. At the bottom, by the ossuary, he found the candle still burning. It sat on the floor beside a cracked Bible, and behind it, etched into the stone wall with what looked like fingernails, were the words Vidi illum in tenebris et tenebrae devreverent me. I saw him in the dark, and the dark consumed me. That was the beginning of what would come to be called the Agnes Vanishings. 12 novices, no trace, no signs of violence, no footprints, no doors unlocked save the front gate. No one had seen them leave. No one had seen them taken. In the weeks that followed, the village descended into a fog of suspicion and fear. Some claimed the nuns had run away. Others blamed wolves, or Indians, or cultists. But a few those who had lived in Black Hollow long enough spoke of something far older. They remembered the hill before the convent, the stories of bonfires centuries before, when the Jesuits vanished and the locals refused to speak of what they'd seen. The way the wind never blew right near the summit, how the trees there never bloomed quite fully, how birds never nested within earshot of the bell tower. But those were just whispers until the dreams began. It started with the children first. Little Thomas Kilner, only 6, woke up screaming that something tall and thin had stood at the end of his bed, whispering a song in a voice like cracked glass. He said it wore a nun's habit, but its face was a shadow and its hands were bones wrapped in lace. He wouldn't sleep for 3 nights after that, and when he did, he bit off the tip of his own tongue in his sleep. Then came the dreams of Mrs. Winthrop, the apothecary's wife. She dreamt of standing in the chapel at St. Agnes, though she had never been inside it. In the dream, she saw all 12 novices kneeling in a circle around the altar, their faces lifted, eyes wide and blank, mouths sewn shut with coarse black thread. Above them hovered a figure not quite human, not quite spirit. It had antlers, made of ash, and its eyes were mirrors that showed her own reflection. Screaming by the end of the week, 8 people in the village reported similar dreams. Most involved singing off-key hymns that they could hum but not reproduce. Others spoke of footsteps pacing outside their homes at night, dragging chains. Always 12 sets of feet. Sheriff Rourke kept returning to the convent. He brought dogs. They refused to enter the chapel, cowering at the threshold, tails tucked, whining. One of them, a hound named Gideon, collapsed in a seizure at the base of the bell tower and never walked again. The sheriff stayed long hours in the chapel, reading the abandoned hymn book, trying to decode the strange language. He sent pages to a university in Boston. The reply came weeks later in the form of a single sentence: "This script is not known to man." Meanwhile, rumors spread like rot. They said the sisters had been performing rituals in the crypt, trying to summon something, trying to bind it. That the hymns weren't prayers, but incantations. That Mother Elsbeth had once been seen standing barefoot in the snow behind the chapel, arms raised to the sky, speaking in tongues no human throat was meant to shape. These were, of course, rumors. But Black Hollow had few distractions in winter, and fear is a flame that spreads fast through dry minds. Then, on the 12th night after the disappearance, something changed. The bell rang again, one soft chime, just after midnight, enough to wake half the village, enough to drive Father Leclerc to his knees in prayer. Sheriff Rourke assembled a search party the next morning. He did not ask the priest to join them this time. He brought torches, hammers, even guns. They weren't sure what they expected to find, but they were certain of one thing: whatever was inside the convent now was no longer holy. The front gate was closed again, but the latch was broken, as if snapped from the inside. Snow blanketed the courtyard, but this time there were tracks. Bare feet, dozens of them. They led in loops and spirals, crossing over one another like a ritual pattern, etched into the snow. Inside the chapel, the crucifix was gone. Only the nails remained, embedded in the stone above the altar. One of the men, a mason named Elias Trent, ventured into the eastern wing and found something worse than death in the novices' dormitory. Every mirror had been smashed, but the broken pieces still reflected faces, not their own, not human. Elias clawed at his own eyes, trying to make them stop looking. They found the library desecrated, pages torn from ancient volumes, arranged in patterns on the floor like symbols. One looked like an eye with thorns. Another resembled a doorway made of spines. And then came the sound, a humming, soft, melodic, childlike. It came from the crypt. Rourke descended the stairs, alone this time, torch in one hand, crucifix in the other. He claimed he did not believe in ghosts, but what he saw down there changed his mind forever. 12 figures, kneeling, robed in the tattered remnants of novice habits, their backs to him, their faces hidden, humming in unison, heads rocking gently side to side like children. In a lullaby, around them, salt had been poured in a perfect circle. In the center stood the cracked Bible again, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. He stepped forward. The humming stopped, one by one. The figures turned, but their faces were not the faces of girls. They were masks, sewn from something leathery, with eyes that bulged wet and black. Not eyes of the living, not even of the dead. They rose, but made no sound, and then they collapsed like puppets with their strings cut, falling to the stone with the sound of wet cloth and splintered bone. When the others came running at the sheriff's screams, the crypt was empty again. All but one thing remained, a new hymn book, placed on the altar, written in that same impossible language. On its first page, a single line, "The offering has been received." After the night of the second bell, Black Hollow changed. People stopped going outside after sunset. Windows were shuttered even at noon. Children were kept home from school, and the parish, once the heart of the town, stood deserted. For Father Leckler, who had begun to waste away, pale and hollow-eyed, muttering during Mass in a voice only half his own, he refused to speak of what he had seen that night. Only once did he confide in the gravedigger, a mute man named Jeb Costa. He handed Jeb a folded scrap of paper, pressed it into his calloused palm with a trembling hand, and whispered, "Burn this if I'm taken." 3 nights later, Leclerc was gone, his bed untouched, his shoes by the door, his Bible open to the Book of Job. The only sign of him was a smear of soot on the altar and the faint smell of myrrh. Jeb did not burn the note. He couldn't read. Instead, he buried it under the chapel steps, with a sprig of rosemary and 3 black feathers he claimed he found on the convent path. When the villagers asked the sheriff to close the convent down, Rourke hesitated. He had grown gaunt, unshaven, with eyes that searched the horizon constantly. He drank now heavily and kept a pistol holstered even inside his own home. But he didn't refuse the request. He ordered the convent sealed iron plates were bolted. Over the doors, every window boarded shut. Salt poured across the thresholds. A cross was nailed upside down on the chapel gate knot, as a symbol of defiance, but as a warning, as if to say, here, holiness failed, and still, the dreams continued. Agnes Leary, a laundress whose cousin had once served in the convent's kitchen, slit her wrists after telling the mayor she could hear voices in the pipes reciting prayers. Backward, one child, Noma vanished while playing near the woods behind the convent. Her red mitten was found hanging from the convent fence the next morning. Tied with black thread, desperation crept into the town like fog, thick and smothering. That's when Sheriff Rourke made his last mistake. He returned to the convent one final time, but he didn't go alone. He brought with him two others, Elias Trent, the mason who'd seen the mirrors, and a newcomer, Dr. Harmon Wills, an amateur scholar from Boston with an unhealthy obsession with lost religious texts and pre-Christian cults. Wills had read about the disappearances in an obscure theological journal and begged Rourke to let him examine the convent's hymn books and relics. "Something old is buried here," Wills had said, eyes wild. "Not a ghost, not a demon, something left behind." They entered just before sundown. None of them came out by morning. What happened that night is pieced together only from what was left behind, and from the account of a man who should not have survived. His name was Elias Trent, and he was found wandering the frozen road at dawn, barefoot, bloodied, muttering a single phrase over and over. "It sings in the stone. It sings in the stone. It sings in the stone." His feet were frostbitten, his teeth cracked. His eyes never focused again, but he had something clenched in his fist, a page from the hymn book. Not torn, but burned into parchment, the ink scorched black. It depicted a strange singular doorway made of ribs, with hands reaching outward. From within, Dr. Will's journal was found inside his rented room at the tavern, though the man himself was never seen again. The final entry read, "They were not praying, they were containing the hymns, the salt, the ritual meant to bind, not to summon. They made a mistake in 1842. Something answered, and it never left." Sheriff Rourke's body was never recovered. Only his badge, placed gently on the chapel's altar, resting atop a single novice veil, clean and untouched. The veil belonged to Therese, one of the 12, who had vanished. But here's the detail no one could explain. The fabric was warm as if it had been worn only moments before. Spring came late to Black Hollow that year. Snow lingered longer than usual, heavy and wet, weighing down the roofs until beams splintered and groaned like tired bones. The woods around the convent thickened with fog that never quite lifted, as though the land itself had forgotten how to breathe. The townspeople kept their distance from the hill. Even hunters avoided it, choosing hunger over proximity. No one mentioned the convent anymore in open conversation. It became a dead name. To utter it aloud was to invite ... attention. Yet even silence has limits. In April, the Hollow received an unmarked crate shipped by rail from Pennsylvania. No sender, no explanation. Inside, a bundle of letters, edged yellowed and bound in waxed cloth. On the outside, to be opened only in shadow. No one knew what it meant. Mayor Dunley took the letters to the town hall and read them by candlelight. They were addressed from a former nun sister, Colette, one of the 12. But the postmarks were wrong. One was dated 1899, 4 years after she vanished. Another bore the seal of a French postal authority that had ceased to exist decades before. Some were stamped with dates that had not yet come to pass. The contents were worse. Sister Colette wrote not as a woman in hiding, but as a voice crying from a place far removed from the world. Her words rambled, at times lucid, at times frantic. She spoke of a song beneath the bones, of waking to find herself inside the convent, but surrounded by no one she recognized. Their habits are sown from shadows, she wrote, and their hands do not know prayer. She described an altar made of salt and teeth, of rituals conducted at the salted door, a phrase she never explained, of being made to kneel for hours while something whispered behind her eyes. They say the old hymns again, she wrote, but now I understand them. They are not praises, they are warnings. The most chilling entry came midway through the bundle. I saw Mother Elsbeth again. She is changed. Her eyes are dry, like stone. She walks without touching the ground. When she speaks, the air burns. She told me, the gates are open now, Colette. We held it back as long as we could, and then she smiled, and her teeth were wrong. Too many. Mayor Dunley died in his sleep the following night. His wife found him with his hands folded over the letters, lips parted, eyes still open, fixed on the ceiling, with an expression that no one could bear to describe. The letters were burned in the town square 2 days later. But the dreams returned. This time, they didn't stay in sleep. People began hearing hymns during waking hours, faint, echoing from inside walls, seeping through floorboards. Children sang them in their cribs. Old men hummed them as they stared blankly at empty fireplaces. The sound came always from below. That was when Reverend Ambrose, a man who had only recently moved to Black Hollow and knew nothing of its past, began preaching against the silence. He condemned the town's cowardice, called the convent an infected wound in the Lord's skin. He swore to tear it down, and for a moment the town believed him. They watched as he and 5 men volunteers climbed the hill with axes and sledgehammers and crowbars. They vanished behind the chapel gates under a sky so grey it seemed made of lead. What returned that evening wasn't Reverend Ambrose. He walked into the town square just after sunset, alone, barefoot, robes drenched in something thick and black that smelled like copper and mold. His eyes were rolled back, lips cracked and muttering, "It's beneath us. It always was. The door is not in the convent, it's a convent." He collapsed. When they tried to move him, his body split down the center, not with blood, but with salt, not powder, not mineral, but long, jagged crystals, like blades erupting from his spine. The other 5 were never found. Only their tools were recovered, twisted, rusted, and arranged in a spiral in the center of the chapel floor. That night, the bell rang a 3rd time, but it didn't chime, it screamed. A sound so piercing, so full of hate and hunger, that the town's dogs howled in unison, and the chapel windows, long since boarded, shattered outward into the dark. After the 3rd bell screamed, silence fell, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against the skin like a burial shroud. In the following days, Black Hollow became unrecognizable. Birds stopped singing. The river slowed. The sun, when it showed, was pale and tired, its light failing to warm even bare skin. People whispered of time skipping, of clocks that ticked backward, of candles that unburned. But no one dared approach the hill any more, except one. Her name was Nora Aldwyn, the town's librarian and keeper of forgotten records. At 52, she was a woman of few words and fewer indulgences. But she had known something was coming, had felt it for years in the pulse beneath the floorboards of her home. In the way her rosary grew colder, the closer she stepped toward the convent path. She waited until nightfall, clad in her father's old wool coat, with a satchel of books and a vial of holy water that had long since lost its blessing. Nora climbed the hill with a lantern and no promise of return. In her journal later, in a burned stump near the edge of the woods, she wrote, "They were never supposed to last this long. The old rites were a patch, not a cure." Elsbeth knew that. She knew when they opened the door, something stepped halfway through. Not enough to walk in our world, ... but enough to whisper. She reached the convent just before midnight. The gates were missing, not opened, gone, ripped from the stone like pulled teeth. Inside, she found the walls sweating salt, thick and glistening, running like tears down every hallway. The air was alive with static, the sound of invisible insects crawling just under the skin of the world, and the floorboards pulsed, not metaphorically. They breathed. The chapel had changed. Where the crucifix had once hung, there now stood a Schaefer figure, human in outline but wrong in every detail, taller than any man, covered in a robe of what looked like stitched habits, torn from each of the vanished novices. Its face was obscured by a veil of ash dots. Around it knelt 12 figures. They did not move, did not blink. Nora wrote that she recognized the shape of their veils, the curve of their spines. They were the missing girls, but not breathing, not dead, held suspended in a moment between prayer and surrender. She called out to them. She raised the vial of holy water and threw it toward the altar. The water struck the stone and boiled on contact. From the veiled figure came a voice, not spoken, not shouted, a feeling placed directly in her mind, like ink spilled in the cracks of her thoughts. It was never their fault, the voice said. They were the seal, you were the silence. Now the song is almost sung. Nora fled. She barely made it down the hill. When the villagers found her at dawn, she was half mad, her lantern shattered, her left hand crusted in salt so thick it had cracked the skin beneath. Before she lost consciousness, she gasped a final sentence. "It's not a convent, it's a mouth, and it's opening." That day, cracks began appearing in the stones of Black Hollow's oldest buildings. Not from weather, not from age. They ran in perfect line symbols. Almost one resembled the mark Elias Trent had clutched in his frost-bitten fist months before. The symbol of the doorway made of ribs. By summer, 3 more people disappeared. All of them young women. None of them affiliated with the church. But each had dreamed, in the days before they vanished, of standing inside the convent, ... singing. Their parents said they woke with dried salt in their hair, and in each empty bed. Under the pillow, they left behind a page from the hymn book, each one written in that impossible, cruel language, each one titled with the same name, Cantus Solis, the Song of Salt. By autumn, Black Hollow was no longer merely haunted, was claimed. The townspeople stopped speaking of the convent altogether, not out of superstition, but because the name itself brought a taste of blood to the tongue. Children who dared whisper of it found their mouths dry and eyes burning. The librarian's journal, Nora Aldwin's, disappeared from the mayor's office, though the building had remained locked and watched. In its place was a scrap of parchment nailed to the mayor's door. It bore no words, just a symbol burned into the surface. The doorway again, meanwhile. The town's church bells, long silent, began to tremble at odd hours, not ringing, just a faint, metallic shiver. The sort of sound one hears only in the bones. No one could find the cause. The belfry was untouched, but the resonance came more frequently, always followed by a brief snow. Even in September, then came the stones, large slabs, weathered and unnatural began to rise from the earth around the base of the convent hill. Some appeared overnight, standing 6 or 7 feet tall, pale grey with veins of iron running through them like frozen blood. Others surfaced more slowly, breaking the topsoil with groans that sounded like voices in mourning. Each stone bore carvings set not with tools, but with heat, as though scorched into place. No one could interpret the symbols, but the older folk, those with roots deeper than even the parish itself, began whispering a word long buried, Thalarum. The name wasn't in any Bible, it wasn't Latin, it wasn't anything scholars could trace, but the children started speaking it in their sleep. No one knew what it meant, only that it sounded wrong coming from such small mouths, desperate for answers. The town summoned Dr. Albrecht Vellum, a reclusive folklorist and linguist from Arkham College. He had spent years cataloguing apocryphal psalms and heretical gospels. He arrived in Black Hollow with 2 trunks of books and an iron crucifix worn smooth from years of handling. Vellum spent 3 days locked in the convent before re-emerging, grey-faced and nearly blind in one eye. He claimed he had not found the missing novices, nor the origin of the hymn book's script, but he had heard something beneath the chapel, beneath the stone. A constant rhythm, like a heartbeat made of whispers. In his own words, it is not alive in the way we understand. It does not hunger for food or worship. It hungers for patterns, repetition, memory, rhythm. That's what the sisters did. They weren't praying. They were keeping time. With each hymn, they matched the beat. And now, the song is shifting key. Something is trying to harmonize. Vellum fled that same night. His carriage overturned in the valley, found empty. The horses were dead, mouths foaming with salt water, and in his abandoned trunk, between pages of cracked vellum, was a single line scrawled in desperation. The salt sinks back. Black Hollow's cemetery began to collapse shortly after. Graves caved in, not with rot or flood, but with pull, as if something beneath the ground had begun breathing in. One by one, stones vanished into the sinkholes. The gravedigger's hut was found vacant, its spade buried upright in the yard beside his coat, his boots, and a circle of salt broken in 3 precise places. Even the sky changed. Storms circled the convent but never passed through it. Thunder growled around the hill, but rain refused to touch its soil. Lightning struck the chapel 3 times in a single night, yet the steeple remained untouched, as if the storm feared to finish what it started. Then, one morning, the song changed. It began not in dreams, but in the mouths of those still alive. A merchant was heard humming it, while counting coins his eyes rolled back. A schoolteacher collapsed. During class, her voice muttering in harmony with a tone that came from nowhere. Even the sheriff's own daughter was found standing at her window at 3:33 a.m. Mouth moving, no sound escaping yet, a harmony filled the room, echoing off the glass like a lullaby sung in reverse. And through it all, 12 names began to resurface: Agnes, Marianne, Colette, Evangeline, Isabel, Ruth, Claire, Magdalena, Beatrice, Felicity, Jane, Therese, each name spoken at random moments, by strangers who never knew them, carved into trees, etched into frost, on windows, written in charcoal across abandoned barns. 12 voices, trying to sing one song, but it was incomplete. The final harmony had not yet come. The final week before Black Hollow was abandoned would later be called the quieting dot. It began when the town's clocks stopped, all of them pocket watches, tower bells, Grandfather clocks all hands, frozen at exactly 3:13 a.m., the same time the bell had screamed weeks before. The same time the children whispered names into their pillows. No ticking, no sound. Just a stillness so deep it seemed to press against the ribs. Then came the fog, not mist, not weather. This was something else. It rolled down from the convent, like breath from a mouth long sealed, clinging to surfaces, soaking into walls. It swallowed sounds, warped distance. People walked across their own porches and found themselves stepping onto roads they hadn't visited in years. One woman vanished between her kitchen and garden, only to reappear 12 hours later, barefoot and whispering in French, though she had never spoken a word of it before. The fog carried with it a taste bitter, mineral and sharp. It made the gums ache, the eyes tear, and deep within its folds, always just barely visible, were the outlines of figures, always 12, never moving, always watching, the last known resident to attempt to return. To the convent was a young girl named Eliza. Ward 17. Unremarkable, no ties to the vanished. No dreams, no symptoms, just ... Drawn ... She walked into the fog one morning without shoes, leaving behind a note with 3 words. I hear her, not them. Her, what followed, was unlike anything the town had witnessed before, for the first time since the disappearances. The bell rang again, but this time it did not echo, it pulsed, a single, low, vibrating note felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It resonated through the hills, through the bones of the houses, through the trees themselves. Bark cracked. Ice bloomed on windows. And then the silence returned, heavier than before. That night, witnesses claimed to see the chapel's steeple glow faintly from within, a pale blue radiance flickering like a dying star. Some said they heard voices rising in song, layered and dissonant, like a choir trapped in a spiral stairwell. Others said it was weeping. The next morning, Eliza Ward returned, but she was not the same. She stood at the edge of town, barefoot and silent, wrapped in a nun's veil, a 13th veil. When approached, she smiled, but only with her eyes. Her lips did not move. Her skin had taken on a pallor so pale it shimmered. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but it was not Eliza's. It was Colette's, and then Marianne's, and then Ruth's 12 voices, one after the other, speaking through a girl who had never met them. The seal is undone. The salt was not enough. He is almost through. When the priest, what remained of Father Leclerc, was brought to see her, he did not speak. He fell to his knees and recited a prayer so old no one recognized it, one of protection, of binding. He tried to place a crucifix around her neck. It burst into ash. Eliza's eyes filled with tears, not of pain, of relief. We have held the gate for as long as we could, she whispered, but we were never 13. And there it was, the final truth. The ritual had never been meant for 12. It had always required 13. 13 veils, 13 voices, 13 hearts to sing the song of silence. But one had been missing. One had fled before the circle was complete. Sister Helena, the oldest novice, the most fearful. She had run before the hymn was finished. The balance was never sealed. The door was never locked now. Through Eliza, the gate had its final note. That evening, the fog did not return. Instead, the earth beneath the convent sighed a great exhale. That rattled floorboards and cracked mirrors across Black Hollow. Trees split. Windows wept brine. and every stone that had risen round the hills sank, drawn inward toward the chapel like filings to a magnet. The veil fell from Eliza's shoulders, she collapsed. Her final breath carried a whisper, barely audible, but heard in every corner of town. He remembers us now. The morning after Eliza Ward's body was laid to rest, if it could still be called a body, Black Hollow awoke to nothing. No birds, no wind, no bells. Even the trees seemed to have paused in breathless anticipation. Something had changed. The convent. Hill, once crowned with its cracked chapel and crumbling stone, was now bare, not collapsed, not destroyed, gone, as if erased. The iron gates that had marked its entrance lay twisted in the valley below, tangled like the bones of some massive, long-dead beast. In their place, only a circle remained burned into the earth, 10 feet deep, 30 across, filled with powdery grey ash that no wind could scatter. At the very centre stood a single stone. No carvings, no symbols, just a single, perfect vertical crack, and from that crack, salt bled. The villagers, what few remained, stood at its edge in silence. Some wept, some knelt. None spoke, because they knew. The gate was no longer a gate. It was a wound the land could not close. Within days, the town's boundaries began to fold inward. Roads twisted upon themselves, rivers reversed, compass needles spun endlessly. Letters sent to neighbouring counties returned unopened, addresses blurred or erased. Black Hollow, it seemed, had been cut away, not removed from the map, but from understanding. Like a name you once knew, lost on the tip of your tongue, forever out of reach. The last account from the town came in the form of a hand-carved journal discovered decades later in the ruins of a chapel hundreds of miles away, one that bore no official name, but whose altar was etched with familiar marks. The journal belonged to Jonah Kindred, the gravedigger's apprentice. He had survived, not because of bravery, not because of faith, because he had listened. He described dreams not of terror but of memory. He saw the sisters as they once were, laughing, praying, bathing their feet in the cold stream that ran behind the convent. He saw Mother Elsbeth as a young woman, not stern and cold, but afraid, haunted by a prophecy passed down from before even the first stone of the chapel had been laid. We were never meant to hold him, she had written in a secret hymn book buried beneath the altar, only to slow him. Jonah saw what came before the convent, a circle of stones, women cloaked in white, salt burning in copper bowls, a song sung not to praise but to bind, and in the centre something that moved without moving, that listened and now ... It remembered. His final entries grow more erratic, the handwriting more jagged, as though written during tremors. The 13 are complete. The song is finished. He hums now, in the roots of the earth. He is not cruel, he is curious. There is no more Black Hollow, only the hollow where black was. The final page was blank, save for a single, faint ring of salt. Today, there is no town marked Black Hollow on any official map. Locals near the region speak of a stretch of woods where compasses fail, and birds will not fly. Hikers sometimes vanish, sometimes return days later with no memory of where they've been. Only a lingering tune stuck in their minds, a melody they hum without realizing, until someone else joins in. There are those who say it's just myth, old folklore, a ghost story sown from tragedy in time. But sometimes, on windless nights, a low tone rises from the forest, a tone without source, without echo, a single note, almost beautiful, and if you listen too closely, you might hear a second voice begin to sing, then a third, a fourth, a fifth, until there are 12, and somewhere just beneath your feet, the 13th joins in.